He thought he was simply making a kind gesture. But instead, he found himself stepping into a moment that would alter his life forever. The morning air carried a crispness as Clint Eastwood guided his car along the winding coastal roads of Monterey, California. Beside him, the vast Pacific stretched endlessly, its waves rolling in, slow, steady, a rhythm he had grown to admire over the years. At 94, he still longed for moments like these. Solitude, the soft hum of an old jazz tune in the background, the open road ahead with no obligations, no rush. Retirement had loosened time's grip on him, yet routine still held its quiet pull. A stop at his favorite gas station for a coffee, perhaps a peaceful moment on the pier before the day fully unfolded. But then, something made him slow down. At the very edge of the gas station parking lot, just beyond the fuel pumps, an elderly woman sat on the curb. Wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, her frail body seemed lost within the fabric. In her bony hands, she clutched a crumpled plastic grocery bag. Her shoes, worn down, soles split, rested against the cold pavement. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply sat there, staring into the distance at something unseen. People passed her without a second glance. A businessman walked out of the store, coffee in hand, barely acknowledging her presence. A mother gently pulled her child closer, subtly turning her body, as if shielding the little one from having to notice. Even the gas station clerk, leaning against the doorway, spared her a glance, just a second too long, before slipping back inside. But she wasn't begging. She wasn't causing trouble. She was just there. Clint's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He had seen people like her before, too many times, the forgotten ones, those who faded into the background of a world moving too fast to care. Normally, he would have kept driving. Maybe it was age, or maybe the weight of too many years watching kindness slowly disappear. But something about this woman made him stop. Pulling into the gas station, he cut the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, observing her. Something felt off. She wasn't just another lost soul on the streets. There was something in the way she sat, the way her hands trembled slightly as they clutched the bag. And then, she lifted her head. Their eyes met, sunken, weary, yet holding something deep within. And in that instant, Clint saw it, recognition. It was faint at first, just a flicker, but it was there. A tightness formed around her mouth. The way her gaze didn't just sweep past him like it did with everyone else. She knew him, but Clint, he couldn't place her, and that unsettled him. Stepping out of his car, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots broke the quiet. The gas station was still, aside from the occasional hum of an engine pulling in or out, and the distant cry of seagulls circling overhead. Yet, the woman never looked away. He approached, slow, cautious, not wanting to startle her. Up close, she seemed even frilier than he had first thought. Deep lines etched into her face, her skin worn like parchment left too long in the sun. And yet, beneath the weight of time, something remained. A quiet strength, an endurance that hadn't yet crumbled under the years. She squinted up at him, her lips parting slightly, as if trying to form a thought she wasn't sure she wanted to voice. "You need anything, ma'am?" Clint asked, his voice steady but gentle. She exhaled, a sound almost like a laugh, but without a trace of humor. "Didn't think you'd recognize me." Clint's brow furrowed. There was a rasp in her voice, one that came from years of smoking, or maybe just time itself, grinding a person down. "I don't," he admitted, honestly. She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the plastic bag in her lap. It crinkled under her grip, the contents inside shifting slightly, though he couldn't see what she was holding onto so tightly. "You used to," she murmured. A silence settled between them, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Clint was no stranger to lost memories creeping back when he least expected them. In his line of work, faces blurred, voices faded. Time twisted everything together until the past became a fog he could only sometimes navigate. But something in the way she looked at him told him this wasn't just another forgotten face. Still, he didn't press. Instead, he gestured toward the gas station. "Can I get you something? Coffee? A sandwich?" For a moment, she didn't answer, just studied him, like she was trying to decide if this was real, if he was real. Then, finally, she gave a small nod. "Coffee, black." Clint returned the nod, turning toward the store. But just as his hand reached for the door, her voice stopped him. "They used to call me Annie." The name hit like a weight in his chest. Clint froze, inches from the gas station door. But that name, it stopped him. Cold. Annie. It wasn't just a name. It was a memory, a face from the past, blurred by time, but suddenly crashing into focus. Clint turned back, his breath slow and steady, but his heartbeat? That had picked up. Annie. It couldn't be. Could it? She studied him, lips pressing together like she was waiting for the realization to hit. And when it did, it hit hard. 50 years ago. Los Angeles. A different world. A different time. Back then, Clint wasn't the legend. Not yet. He was just a man on the rise, juggling fame, the pressures of Hollywood, and a personal life that always seemed to be unraveling. And Annie. Annie was the one who slipped through his fingers. Memories unraveled like an old film reel playing in his mind. She had been a waitress at a small diner he used to visit after late-night shoots. Back then, she was young, sharp, full of fire, the kind of woman who didn't care who he was. She gave him attitude, sarcasm, and the best damn coffee in town. They spent hours talking, laughing, arguing, about everything and nothing. But life pulled them apart. He got busier. Movie roles stacked up. His name became bigger than he ever imagined. And Annie, she disappeared. No goodbye. No trace. Just gone. And now, here she was, sitting on a curb outside a gas station, looking nothing like the woman he once knew, yet somehow still the same. "Annie," he said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after all these years. She gave a small, almost sad smile. "Took you long enough." Clint ran a hand over his face, trying to process what he was seeing, what he was feeling. "What the hell happened to you?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Annie exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. "That's a long story, cowboy." But Clint wasn't leaving without an answer. He crouched down, his knees protesting, but he barely noticed. His eyes never left her face. She had vanished from his life without a trace, and now, here she was, older, worn down by time, but still Annie, and she had suffered. That much was clear. "You think you could handle the long version?" she asked, her voice laced with something between amusement and pain. Clint didn't answer right away. He just watched her. There was a weight behind her words, something deeper than just a rough few years. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't just life taking a wrong turn. This was something else. "I've got time," he finally said. Annie let out a slow breath, looking away. Her gaze drifted toward the passing cars, the people who didn't stop, who didn't care. "I left L.A. in '79, she began, her voice quieter now. "Figured I'd had enough of chasing dreams that never panned out. Thought I'd start fresh. Went up to Sacramento, got a job at a bookstore. Met someone. We got married. Thought it was a good thing. Clint didn't move. He already knew where this was going. But he wasn't a good man, she continued, fingers tightening around the plastic bag in her lap. Started small. A little control here, a little gaslighting there. Before I knew it, I wasn't me anymore. She let out a bitter laugh. You ever wake up one day and realize you're living someone else's life? That you're a stranger in your own home? Clint clenched his jaw. He had seen it before. Friends. People in the industry. Women who stayed because they had nowhere else to go. I tried to leave, she admitted, her voice cracking for the first time. But he made sure I had nothing. No money. No car. No family left to call. She paused, shaking her head. I stuck it out for years because I thought. I don't even know what I thought. That he'd change. That I could fix it. A humorless chuckle. Stupid. Clint didn't say anything. He knew better than to call her that. I finally ran in '99, she continued, eyes darkening with the memory. Left everything. Just grabbed a bag and took off. Spent the next few years bouncing from place to place. Every time I got my footing, something knocked me back down. Jobs dried up. Landlords hiked the rent. And before I knew it, this was my life. She gestured around them. The curb. The gas station. The nothingness. Clint swallowed hard. While he had been filming blockbusters, making headlines, living his life, Annie had been fighting to survive. And now, something burned in his chest. An anger that had nowhere to go. Why didn't you ever reach out? He finally asked. You knew I would have helped. She looked at him, not with anger, not even resentment, just understanding. That's not how it works, Clint, she said softly. You don't ask for help when you've got nothing left. You just survive. And that hit harder than anything else. Clint sat there, silent, the weight of Annie's words pressing down on him like a lead vest. She had survived. But at what cost? The world had moved on without her, without even noticing. She had slipped through the cracks. And that didn't sit right with him. Behind them, the gas station door chimed as someone walked out, coffee in hand. A couple by the pump stole glances, whispering to each other. People were starting to notice. A man in his 30s lifted his phone. Discreetly, the phone was lifted. Clint knew the routine. The moment someone recognized him, cameras started rolling. He was used to it. But this wasn't for show. Annie noticed too. She shifted, adjusting the plastic bag in her lap, fingers curling tightly around the handles. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something else. Clint, she murmured, barely moving her lips. People are watching. He didn't care. Let them watch. Slowly, he straightened, his body stiff from crouching too long. The young guy filming hesitated, unsure whether to lower his phone or keep recording. Clint met his gaze. You waiting for something? His voice was calm, but firm. The man stammered, caught off guard. Sorry, I just... Then put it down, Clint said. A beat of silence. Then, the guy slipped his phone into his pocket. The couple at the pump quickly turned their attention back to the gas meter, pretending they hadn't been eavesdropping. Clint sighed, rolling his shoulders before turning back to Annie. She was still sitting there, still gripping that plastic bag like it was the last thing she owned. It probably was. You need a place to stay, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Annie shook her head almost immediately. I'm fine. Like hell you are. She exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand across her forehead. Look, I appreciate the concern, but I don't need some charity case moment with Clint Eastwood. I've made it this far on my own. Clint barely reacted, arms crossing over his chest. Her eyes snapped up to his, and for a second he thought she was going to tell him off. But instead she just sighed, shoulders sagging. She was tired, not just physically, the kind of exhaustion that came from years of hard living. Before she could argue again, Clint reached into his jacket, pulling out his wallet. I'm getting you a motel room, he said. One with heat, a shower, and a damn lock on the door. You don't like it? Tough. Annie opened her mouth, ready to protest, but nothing came out. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to stop running. And the world had been watching. But no one expected what Clint did next. The silence stretched between them. Annie's lips parted like she wanted to fight back, but the words never came. Clint wasn't giving her a choice, and she knew it. This wasn't for show, wasn't about making a statement. This was personal. Still, Annie hesitated. And then, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Clint exhaled. We figure it out. The words hung heavy between them, packed with more meaning than either of them was ready to unpack. Without ceremony, he pulled out a crisp stack of $100 bills and held it out to her. Annie stared, unmoving. I don't need. Take it, Clint cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. It's not a damn handout. It's a start. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the money, gripping it like it might vanish if she blinked too long. This wasn't just cash. It was a lifeline. But Clint wasn't finished. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and started dialing. Annie watched him warily. Who are you calling? An old friend, he said, stepping away as his voice dropped lower. She caught fragments of the conversation, something about a house, a long-term plan, no strings attached. Her throat tightened. This was real. Meanwhile, the gas station clerk had stepped back outside, lingering in the doorway. A few cars had stopped, people pretending to check their phones while stealing glances. Across the lot, another camera was lifted, recording in secret. Then, a voice cut through the moment. Excuse me, sir. Are you Clint Eastwood? A woman in her late 40s stood a few feet away, gripping her teenage son's arm. The boy's wide eyes darted between Clint and Annie, like he'd just stumbled into a movie scene. Clint didn't flinch. Yeah. The woman hesitated, glancing at Annie before speaking softly. That's really kind of you. Annie stiffened, shifting uncomfortably. She hated being someone's good deed of the day. But Clint turned fully to face the woman, his jaw set. It's not kind, he said. It's what should have happened a long time ago. The woman blinked, caught off guard. Then, she gave a small nod and gently nudged her son along. Clint turned back to Annie. Come on. Let's get out of here. For the first time since he'd sat down, she didn't argue. She let him help her up, her grip weak but steady. The cameras caught everything. The way Clint guided her to his car, the way Annie clutched that money like it wasn't just paper, but a second chance. By the time the video hit the internet, it shattered headlines. But Clint didn't care about that, because for the first time in over 50 years, he had finally done right by Annie. The news cycle exploded. Clint Eastwood rescues homeless woman. Social media flooded with the story. Interviews. Requests for statements. Celebrities chimed in. Clint ignored it all, because this wasn't about saving Annie. It was about giving her back the life that had been stolen from her. A week later, Annie sat at the kitchen table of a modest but warm home in Carmel by the sea. A real bed, a stocked fridge, a place to breathe. Clint sat across from her, sipping coffee. No cameras, no reporters, just them. "You gonna be okay?" he asked, watching her carefully. Annie smirked, setting down her mug. "Been okay this whole time, cowboy." Clint huffed a small laugh. "Yeah, sure." But they both knew the truth. She had been surviving. Now, she could finally start living. Sometimes, life pulls people apart. Time steals moments we thought we'd always have. But the past, it has a way of circling back when we least expect it. It's never too late to right a wrong. Never too late to do what should have been done in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, it's never too late for a second chance. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's make kindness louder than silence.